"Do not call me your wife," Clara Whitmore said, her voice steady, though her hands shook behind her back. The candles in the ducal bedchamber burned low, and the man she had married that morning stood across the room studying her, as though she were a puzzle he had not chosen to solve, but could not walk away from either. Julian Ashford, Duke of Ravenscar, set down the glass he had been holding. He did not raise his voice. "Then, what shall I call you?" he asked, "if not my wife?" Clara had expected anger. She had expected indifference, even relief, since she knew this marriage meant as little to him as it did to her, a transaction between two families conducted over solicitors and signatures rather than affection. What she had not expected was the quiet weight in his answer. "I will call you nothing else," he said. "You are my wife. That will not change because you wish it to." The words settled over her like frost. She turned away from him and walked to the window, where the gardens of Ravenscar Hall stretched dark and unfamiliar beneath a thin moon. 3 months ago she had never heard his name. 3 months ago her father had still been alive, and the household in Surrey had still believed itself modestly comfortable, if never wealthy. Then the solicitors came, and the truth came with them. Her father had gambled away nearly everything, leaving behind debts that would have swallowed the family home, the small income her mother depended upon, and the futures of her 2 younger sisters. She had not known, when the Duke of Ravenscar's man of business arrived with an offer of marriage, that dukes negotiated such things the way other men negotiated the price of horses. She had not known that her family's ruin could be measured so precisely against his fortune, and that the sum required to save them was, to him, unremarkable. She had agreed because there had been no other door left open. She had told herself, on the long carriage ride to the ceremony, that she would give him her hand and nothing more. Not her heart, not her trust, and certainly not the title of wife in any sense beyond the legal one required to settle her family's debts. "I did not marry you to be owned," she said now, without turning from the window. "I married you because my family needed saving, and you needed an heir eventually, or a wife eventually, or whatever it is dukes need. That is all this is." Behind her, she heard him cross the room. He did not touch her. He stopped a careful distance away, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold air near the glass, far enough that she did not feel crowded. "Is that truly all you believe this is?" he asked. She turned to face him then, and for the first time she looked at him properly, not as a stranger to be endured but as a man. He was younger than she had expected a duke to be, not yet 30, with dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, gray shot through with green. There was nothing soft in his face. It was a face built for command, for cold rooms and colder decisions. But there was something else there too, something she could not name, buried beneath the composure like a stone under still water. "I believe it is a contract," she said. "I have read the settlement papers. I know what is required of me and what is not. I am not asking for cruelty, Your Grace. I am only asking that we both remember what this is, so that neither of us is disappointed later." A faint sound came from him, not quite a laugh. "Disappointed," he repeated. "You think I expect nothing from you but an heir and a signature." "I think that is what most men in your position would expect," she said. "Then you have not yet learned very much about me," he said. And there was an edge in his voice now, not anger, but something sharper, something that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "I did not choose this marriage lightly, Clara. And I did not choose you at random." She frowned. "What do you mean by that?" He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing how much to say, and then he shook his head slightly, retreating behind the composure she had already come to recognize as his armor. "That is a conversation for another night," he said. "Tonight, you are tired, and you have every right to be. I will not press you for anything you are not willing to give." He turned to leave the room, and something in the side of his back, straight and controlled and utterly alone, caught at her in a way she did not expect and did not welcome. "Wait," she said. He paused at the door. "Why did you agree to marry a woman you had met only twice?" she asked. "You could have chosen anyone. Any family in England would have handed you their daughter gladly, debt or no debt. Why choose mine?" For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke without turning around. "Because your father, whatever his failings, once did something for my family that I have never forgotten, and I do not leave debts unpaid," he said. "That is part of the reason, not all of it, but it is what I am prepared to tell you tonight." He left before she could ask more, and Clara stood alone in the vast, unfamiliar bedchamber, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor. She pressed a hand to her chest, startled by how quickly her heart was beating, and told herself it was only the strangeness of the day, the exhaustion of the ceremony, the shock of finding herself a duchess in a house she had never seen before that morning. She did not sleep well that night. She lay awake in the enormous bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, turning his words over and over. Your father once did something for my family. What could a modest country gentleman, a man known more for his fondness for cards than for any great deed, have possibly done for a duke? In the morning she rose before the maids came to dress her, and she walked the long gallery outside her chambers, studying the portraits that lined the walls. Generations of Ashfords looked down at her, stern men in velvet and lace, women with cool, appraising eyes. She stopped before a portrait near the end of the gallery, a young man who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Julian, though the painting was old enough that the style suggested it had been made perhaps 10 years before. Beneath it, a small brass plate read, Lord Edmund Ashford, beloved brother. She had not known Julian had a brother. Your Grace. She startled at the voice behind her, and turned to find an older woman watching her from the end of the gallery, dressed in unrelieved black, her gray hair pulled back severely from a face that had once, Clara suspected, been considered handsome. There was nothing warm in her expression now. I am the Dowager Duchess, the woman said. Julian's mother. I trust you slept well in my son's house. The emphasis on the word my was not lost on Clara. She inclined her head politely. I did, thank you, Your Grace, she said, though it was not entirely true. The dowager's gaze moved past her to the portrait of Edmund, and something flickered across her face, gone before Clara could name it. You are looking at my younger son, she said. He has been gone 5 years now. I would ask you not to mention him to Julian. It is not a subject he discusses. Before Clara could ask why, the dowager had already turned and was walking away, her black skirts trailing across the polished floor like a shadow given shape. Clara stood alone in the gallery for a long moment, looking up at the painted face of a man she had never met and would never meet, a man whose absence seemed to hang over this house like a held breath. She thought of Julian's words the night before, of the quiet certainty in his voice when he told her he would call her nothing but his wife, and she wondered, not for the first time since the carriage had brought her through the gates of Ravenscar Hall, exactly what kind of house she had married into, and exactly what kind of man stood at the center of it, guarding secrets with the same careful control he used to guard his heart. She had told him this marriage was nothing more than a contract, but standing in that gallery, beneath the eyes of a dead brother no one was permitted to speak of, she felt, for the first time, a small and unwelcome flicker of curiosity about the man she had promised, on paper if nothing else, to spend the rest of her life beside. It was not affection. She told herself that firmly as she made her way back toward her rooms. It was only the natural interest anyone would feel toward a household full of shadows, nothing more. But that evening, when Julian joined her for dinner in the small family dining room rather than the vast formal hall she had expected, and asked her, with something almost like nervousness beneath his composed exterior, whether the fish had been prepared to her liking, she found herself watching his face far more closely than a woman uninterested in her husband had any reason to do. And when their eyes met across the candlelight, and neither of them looked away as quickly as either had intended, Clara understood that the promise she had made the night before, to keep this marriage a contract and nothing more, was already, quietly and without her permission, beginning to come undone. After the meal, Julian walked her back through the corridors himself, dismissing the footman who came forward with a candle. The house was quiet at this hour, the portraits along the walls reduced to dim shapes in the low light, and Clara found herself matching her pace to his without meaning to. You looked at the gallery today, he said, not quite a question. Her breath caught. I did not mean to intrude, she said carefully. Your mother found me there. Something tightened in his jaw, visible even in the near darkness. My mother finds everyone eventually, he said. It is one of her more reliable talents. Clara hesitated, weighing whether to press further, and decided, for tonight, to let the matter rest. She is proud of this house, Clara said instead. Anyone could see that. Julian did not answer immediately. When he spoke again, his voice had lowered, as though certain words could only be said quietly. This house holds a great many things she is proud of, he said, and a few she cannot bear to speak of at all. I would ask the same of you that she asked of you this morning. Do not raise the subject of my brother, not yet. Clara studied his profile in the candlelight, the tension along his shoulders, the careful stillness of a man holding something contained by sheer will. I will not, she said, but I hope, one day, you will trust me enough to tell me yourself. He turned to look at her then, and for a moment something unguarded passed across his face, quick as a shadow crossing water. Perhaps I will, he said quietly. When they reached her chamber door, he bowed over her hand, formal and correct, and bid her good night. But as she stood alone in her room afterward, Clara found she could still feel the warmth of his fingers against hers, and she understood, with a small and reluctant honesty, that whatever this marriage had been meant to be, it was already becoming something else entirely. Someone had gone through her belongings. Clara noticed it the moment she stepped into her dressing room, the drawers not quite aligned the way she had left them. A small wooden box that held her mother's letters shifted an inch to the left. Her pulse quickened. She had been at Ravenscar Hall only a week, and already she understood that this house did not simply welcome strangers. It tested them. She said nothing to the maids. Instead, she watched, over the following days, the way the household moved around her, the glances exchanged between servants when they thought she could not see, the particular chill that entered a room whenever the Dowager Duchess Augusta appeared in it. Clara had grown up in a modest house with a handful of staff who had known her since birth. She had never before felt like an intruder in her own home. It was Nora, a young housemaid with a quick tongue and quicker hands, who finally told her the truth, though only after Clara had caught her crying behind the linen room and offered a handkerchief instead of a scolding. "They do not think you will last," Nora admitted, wiping her eyes. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I should not say it, but you asked, and I have never been good at holding my tongue when someone is kind to me. The last one did not last either." Clara went very still. "The last one." "Miss Fenwick," Nora said, then caught herself, glancing nervously toward the door. "Lady Beatrice Fenwick. She was meant to marry His Grace, before you. Everyone believed it settled, and then it was not, and no one below stairs was ever told why. She still visits sometimes. Lady Augusta is fond of her, fonder than she is like to be of anyone new." Clara turned this information over carefully in the days that followed, saying nothing to Julian, watching instead for the moment it would surface on its own. She did not have to wait long. The moment came at a dinner held in honor of neighboring families, a gathering the Dowager had insisted upon despite Julian's evident reluctance. Clara had dressed carefully that evening, choosing a gown of deep blue that Julian's own modiste had made for her, and she had felt, for the first time since her arrival, something close to confidence, as she descended the staircase toward the assembled guests. That confidence lasted until she saw the woman standing beside the Dowager, laughing at something with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. She was beautiful in the particular way that seemed effortless, golden-haired, poised, dressed in a shade of green that suited her exactly. When she turned and saw Clara on the stairs, her smile did not falter, but something calculating entered her eyes. "You must be the new Duchess," the woman said, extending a gloved hand as Clara reached the bottom step. "I am Lady Beatrice Fenwick. Julian and I are old friends." The word old carried a weight Clara understood at once. Across the room she saw Julian's expression shift, a tightness around his mouth that had not been there a moment before. He crossed to them quickly, offering his arm to Clara with a formality that felt, for the first time since their marriage, almost defensive. "Beatrice," he said, his tone even but cool. "I did not know you had been invited." "Your mother was kind enough to think of me," Beatrice said lightly. "I do hope that is not a trouble to you." It was not a question, and Clara understood, watching the exchange, that it was not meant to be answered honestly by either of them in front of the assembled guests. The evening proceeded with the strained politeness of a performance everyone had rehearsed without her, and Clara found herself seated across the table from Beatrice, forced to watch the easy, practiced way the other woman drew Julian into conversation about people and places Clara knew nothing of, a shared history that stretched back years before Clara had ever heard the name Ravenscar. "It should not matter to me," Clara told herself firmly, cutting into food she no longer had any appetite for. "This marriage is a contract. I have no claim to jealousy." But when Beatrice reached across the table to touch Julian's sleeve, laughing at some private memory, Clara felt something twist sharply beneath her ribs, and she understood, with a discomfort she could not entirely dismiss, that the feeling had a name, whether or not she wished to claim it. After the guests had gone, Clara retired to her chambers without waiting for Julian, unwilling to let him see whatever expression her face might betray. But he came to her door regardless, knocking softly before she had even changed out of her gown. "May I speak with you?" he asked. She considered refusing. Instead, she opened the door and let him in, standing with her arms crossed as though the posture might protect her from whatever he was about to say. "Beatrice and I were engaged once," he said without preamble, as though he had decided the truth was owed to her plainly, rather than delivered with careful phrasing. 3 years ago. It ended badly, through no fault of hers. and my mother has never forgiven me for allowing it to end at all. She invited Beatrice tonight to remind me of what I gave up. It was not kindness. It was a message. Clara studied him carefully. Why did it end? She asked. Julian was quiet for a long moment, and Clara watched something pass behind his eyes, old grief resurfacing despite his evident effort to keep it contained. Because of my brother, he said finally. Edmund died the year Beatrice and I were meant to marry, and I could not, in the months that followed, be the husband any woman deserved. I broke the engagement myself. She did not want it broken. My mother has resented me for it ever since, and used every opportunity since to remind me of the wife I did not choose. Clara's anger at Beatrice softened, unexpectedly, into something closer to sympathy, though the discomfort of the evening did not entirely fade. I am sorry, she said quietly, for your brother, for all of it. You need not be sorry, he said. It is not your grief to carry. No, she agreed, but I am your wife, and I find I do not care for watching another woman lay claim to what is mine, even in memory. The words left her before she had fully considered them, and she saw Julian's expression shift, surprise breaking through his composure. I thought you did not wish to be called that, he said quietly. Wife. Clara held his gaze, startled by her own honesty. I am beginning to think, she said, that I do not entirely know what I wish anymore. Julian crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, close enough that she felt the same warmth she had felt the first night, standing at this same window. He did not touch her, but he watched her face as though memorizing it. Then perhaps, he said softly, we should discover it together. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the air between them charged with something neither had given a name to yet. It was Clara who finally stepped back, her heart pounding, unwilling to surrender to a feeling she had promised herself she would not allow. Good night, Your Grace, she said, and though her voice was steady, her hands were not, and she suspected he noticed both. After he had gone, Clara sat by the window for a long time, watching the dark gardens below, thinking of Beatrice's easy laughter and Julian's careful grief, of a dead brother whose name could not be spoken, and a mother who wielded old wounds like weapons. She thought, too, of the words Nora had let slip, the warning beneath them. They do not think you will last, she resolved, sitting there in the quiet dark, that she would prove them wrong, though she could no longer say with certainty whether her determination came from pride, from duty, or from something far more dangerous that had begun, without her permission, to take root in her heart. The following morning, she rose early and went walking in the gardens before the household stirred, needing air and space to think. She had not gone far before she found the dowager already there, seated on a stone bench beneath a bare wisteria, watching her approach with an expression Clara could not read. You survived last night, the dowager said. I confess I did not expect it. Clara met her gaze steadily, refusing to look away. I intend to survive a great many nights, Your Grace, she said. I would ask that you stop testing me, and simply tell me what it is you fear. I think we might understand each other better if you did. For a long moment, the dowager said nothing at all, and something in her carefully composed face flickered, uncertain, before she rose from the bench and walked away without another word. But Clara noticed, as she watched her go, that the older woman's steps were slower than before, as though the question had landed somewhere she had not expected it to reach. That afternoon, restless and unwilling to sit idle with her thoughts, Clara asked Nora to walk with her through the parts of the estate she had not yet seen. They passed the stables, where a groom was training a young mare with a patience that reminded Clara faintly of her own father, before his troubles had swallowed the gentler parts of him. They passed the old chapel, unused now, its windows dusty with disuse, and they came, eventually, to a small cottage at the edge of the western woods, half hidden behind overgrown hedges, its shutters closed tight against the light. Whose house is that? Clara asked. Nora's easy chatter stopped abruptly. That belonged to Lord Edmund, she said quietly. He used to go there to paint, before. No one has opened it since he passed. His Grace gave orders years ago that it was to be left exactly as it was. Clara studied the small building for a long moment, feeling the same pull of curiosity that had drawn her to the portrait in the gallery. Have you ever been inside? She asked. Once, Nora admitted, when I first came to work here, before I understood it was forbidden. There are paintings still on the walls, half finished, some of them. It felt wrong to be there, like walking into a room where someone had just stepped out and might return any moment. They did not approach the cottage that day. Clara sensed, even in her curiosity, that some doors were not hers to open yet, not until Julian himself was ready to walk through them beside her. But the image stayed with her through the rest of the afternoon, an unfinished painting waiting in a locked room, a grief so carefully preserved that even 5 years had not been enough to soften it. That evening, Julian found her in the library, a book open in her lap, though she had read the same page 3 times without absorbing a word of it. He came to sit across from her, and for a while neither of them spoke, the fire crackling between them in comfortable silence, a rare thing in a house that had, until now, seemed to hold its breath around her. "You went walking today," he said eventually. "Mrs. Prentice mentioned it to me." Clara set the book aside. "I saw the cottage," she admitted. "Nora told me it was your brother's." She watched him carefully, bracing for the same closed expression she had seen the night before, but instead something in his shoulders eased, as though he had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to finally ask. "Edmund wanted to be a painter," he said quietly. "Not a duke's brother, not a gentleman of leisure attending the right dinners and marrying the right sort of woman. He wanted to paint, and he was good at it, better than anyone in this family ever admitted aloud, because it was not the sort of thing a son of this house was permitted to want. I used to visit him there in the evenings, when our father was occupied elsewhere. It was the only place in this entire estate where either of us could simply exist without the weight of what we were meant to become." "What happened to him?" Clara asked gently, and this time Julian did not deflect the question. "A fever," he said, "sudden and cruel, and over within a week. I was in London when it happened. I did not reach him in time to say goodbye. My mother has never forgiven me for it, though I do not think she could tell you, if you asked her plainly, whether she blames me for being absent or simply blames me for surviving when he did not." Clara reached across the space between them and took his hand, an instinct rather than a decision, and he did not pull away. "That is not a fair burden for you to carry," she said. "Grief rarely concerns itself with fairness," he said, though his fingers tightened around hers, an answer more honest than his words. "Thank you," he added after a moment, "for asking. No one has asked me that plainly in 5 years. Everyone in this house prefers to walk carefully around the subject, as though silence might undo what happened, when in truth it has only made the wound harder to close." They sat together by the fire long after the candles had burned low, and though neither of them spoke of contracts or arrangements or the terms of a marriage negotiated over solicitors' letters, Clara understood, walking back to her chambers that night, that something between them had shifted permanently. A door opened that neither of them was inclined to close again. The letter arrived without warning, tucked among the morning correspondence Clara had grown accustomed to sorting through with her tea, and the moment she recognized Beatrice Fenwick's elegant hand on the outer fold, her stomach turned cold. It was addressed not to Julian, but to her. Clara broke the seal with careful fingers, half expecting some veiled insult, some reminder of years and history she could not compete with. Instead, the letter requested, in polished and perfectly civil terms, that Clara call upon Lady Fenwick at her townhouse the following afternoon, to discuss a matter of some delicacy concerning the Ashford family. She told no one where she was going. The Fenwick townhouse sat on a quiet square not far from the heart of the city, elegant and understated, and Beatrice received her in a small drawing room, with tea already prepared, as though she had been certain Clara would come. She looked less golden in the pale afternoon light, Clara thought, less like the effortless vision from the dinner party, and more like a woman who had spent a great many nights not sleeping well. "Thank you for coming," Beatrice said, gesturing Clara toward a chair. "I imagine you are wondering why I asked." "I am," Clara admitted, seating herself carefully. "I confess I expected you might prefer never to see me again. Something that might have been a laugh, thin and humorless, escaped Beatrice. "I do not dislike you, Your Grace," she said. "I dislike the position I have been placed in, and I am tired of pretending otherwise for the sake of politeness. Julian's mother has visited me 4 times this month. She believes, quite firmly, that your marriage will not last, and she has asked me, more than once, to be ready to step into your place when it fails." Clara's teacup went still in her hand. "She asked you that?" "She did not ask," Beatrice said. "She assumed. There is a difference, though I doubt it comforts you much. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, rather than discover it later in some crueler fashion. I have no wish to marry Julian. That door closed 5 years ago, and grief closed it, not any failing of mine or his. But his mother is not a woman who accepts closed doors easily, and I fear she means to do something about it." "What sort of something?" Clara asked, dread settling low in her chest. Beatrice hesitated, glancing toward the drawing-room door as though to be certain they were truly alone. "There is a cousin," she said finally, "Edmund's cousin on his mother's side. A man named Silas Cromwell. He has debts of his own, significant ones, and he has made no secret in certain circles of his belief that Julian's marriage to a woman with no fortune and no great name was beneath the family. I have heard him say, more than once, that a marriage built on such uneven ground could easily be undone, if the right pressure were applied in the right places. Clara felt the blood drain slowly from her face. What kind of pressure? I do not know precisely, Beatrice admitted. But I know he has been asking questions about your father's debts, about the exact terms of the settlement that brought you into this family. And I know he has been meeting privately with the dowager more often than either of them would like acknowledged. I tell you this not out of kindness alone, though I hope it counts as some, but because I do not wish to see Julian hurt again. He has carried enough grief for one lifetime. I would not wish to add to it, even indirectly, by staying silent. There is something else, Beatrice added, just as Clara rose to leave. Something I do not fully understand myself, but which has troubled me since I first heard it. Silas has spoken, once or twice, of a debt owed to him by Edmund, something from before he died. He never explains what he means by it, and he grows sharp if pressed. I do not know if it is truth or simply another way of making himself feel owed something by this family, but I thought you should know, in case it becomes useful. Clara frowned, turning the strange fragment over in her mind. A debt owed by Edmund. What manner of debt? I truly do not know, Beatrice admitted. Money perhaps, or something less easily named. Silas is not a man who speaks plainly when he can speak in riddles instead. He enjoys watching people search for meaning he has no intention of giving them. Clara thanked her again, more warmly this time, surprised to find that whatever rivalry she had once imagined between them had quietly dissolved into something closer to alliance. As she gathered her gloves to leave, Beatrice caught her hand briefly. Whatever you think of me, she said, I do not wish to see this family destroyed a second time. I watched what Edmund's death did to Julian once already. I would not wish to watch it happen again, for any reason, least of all one engineered by a man like Silas Cromwell for his own petty vengeance. Clara left the townhouse an hour later with her mind spinning, the pleasant fiction of her new life cracking open to reveal something darker underneath. She did not go directly home. Instead she walked, unescorted, through streets she barely saw, turning Beatrice's warning over and over, searching for some thread of it she could disprove. She could not find one. That evening, she found Julian in his study, bent over ledgers by lamplight, and she told him everything, watching his expression harden with each detail, the warmth she had grown accustomed to seeing in his face replaced by something colder and more familiar, the mask he had worn the night of their wedding. Silas has always resented my position, Julian said quietly, once she had finished. He believes the title should have passed through his branch of the family, generations ago, through some dispute I have never fully understood. I did not think even he would stoop to threatening my marriage to reclaim ground he lost before either of us was born. What will he do? Clara asked. I do not know, Julian admitted, but I intend to find out before he does it. The following days passed in a strange, watchful tension, both of them alert to shifts in the household that might once have gone unnoticed. Clara found herself studying the dowager's face at dinner for signs of guilt, listening for footsteps in the corridor at odd hours, and she hated the person this fear was slowly turning her into, suspicious of a house she had only just begun to feel safe in. The blow, when it came, arrived not through Silas directly, but through a letter delivered to half the prominent families of the county, suggesting, in carefully deniable language, that the Duke of Ravenscar's new duchess came from a family so deeply mired in debt and scandal that the marriage itself might not survive legal scrutiny, should certain interested parties choose to challenge the settlement in court. Clara read the copy Julian brought her with her hands shaking, recognizing, buried in the careful phrasing, details about her father's gambling that only someone with access to the original settlement papers could have known. He has been in my study, Julian said, his voice low and dangerous in a way Clara had not heard before. Only my solicitor and I have copies of those papers. Someone in this house gave him access. Clara thought immediately of the dowager, of the cold appraisal in her eyes the first morning in the gallery, of Nora's warning weeks ago. They do not think you will last. But when she said as much to Julian, he shook his head slowly, though his expression remained troubled. My mother is many things, he said. Difficult, proud, unwilling to let go of grief she has carried too long. But she would not hand our private papers to Silas Cromwell of all people. She despises him nearly as much as I do. There is a history there I have never fully understood, something involving Edmund, though she has never spoken of it plainly. Then who? Clara asked. Neither of them had an answer that night. But 2 days later, walking past the Dowager's private sitting room, Clara heard raised voices through the door, and she stopped, unable to help herself, straining to catch the words. "You promised me this would end quietly," the Dowager was saying, her voice sharp with an anger Clara had never heard from her before. "You said you only wanted to frighten her into leaving. I never agreed to this." "You agreed to whatever brought her marriage to an end," a man's voice answered, cold and unfamiliar, and Clara's stomach turned to ice. "I am simply choosing the fastest road to that destination. If you wanted a gentler method, Augusta, you should have found one yourself before I lost patience with waiting." Clara backed away from the door before either of them could discover her there, her heart hammering, the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves into a shape far worse than she had imagined. The Dowager had wanted her gone, yes, had perhaps even conspired in small ways to make Clara doubt her place in this house. But this, whatever Silas Cromwell intended now, had grown beyond the Dowager's control, and the fear in the older woman's voice told Clara that even she understood it. She found Julian in the library and told him what she had heard, watching the color drain from his face as she spoke. "He means to do more than spread rumors," Julian said quietly, once she had finished. "If Silas believes he can use my mother's resentment to unravel this marriage entirely, he will not stop at letters and whispers. I need you to be careful, Clara, more careful than you have been." "I am not afraid of him," Clara said, though her voice betrayed the lie even as she spoke it. "You should be," Julian said, crossing the room to stand before her, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the urgency in his eyes. "I have already lost one person I love, to circumstances I could not control. I will not lose you the same way. Whatever Silas intends, I will not allow it to reach you." The word love hung between them, unclaimed and unexamined, neither of them quite ready to name what had grown in the weeks since that first cold conversation in the ducal bedchamber. But Clara felt it settle over her like warmth returning to a room that had been cold too long, and when Julian's hand slid gently along her jaw, she leaned into it instead of pulling away. "We will face him together," she said, "whatever comes." Together, he agreed, and though the danger pressing in around them had not lessened, Clara found, standing there in the lamplight with his hand still warm against her face, that she was no longer entirely afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Julian sent word to his solicitor, requesting a full accounting of who had accessed the settlement papers in recent weeks, while Clara, unwilling to sit idle while danger circled closer, sought out the Dowager alone in her sitting room, determined to learn the truth about the strange fragment Beatrice had given her. "You spoke of a debt," Clara said, without preamble, once the door had closed behind her. "Something Edmund owed to Silas Cromwell. I heard enough through your door 2 days ago to know there is more to this than either of you has admitted to Julian." The Dowager's composure cracked, just slightly, at the mention of her younger son's name. "Sit down," she said finally, gesturing to the chair across from her, her voice stripped of its usual coldness. "If you insist on knowing, I would rather tell it to you plainly than have you piece it together from fragments and rumor." Clara sat, waiting. "Edmund borrowed money from Silas in the last year of his life," the Dowager said quietly. "A significant sum, more than he could easily repay, spent on his painting, on materials and travel, and a life his father would never have permitted him to pursue openly. He meant to repay it quietly before anyone learned of it, before it became one more disappointment laid at his feet by a family that had never understood him. He died before he could. Silas has held that debt over this family ever since, unpaid and unacknowledged, and he has grown to believe, over 5 years of resentment, that the title itself owes him some form of restitution for it. And you have been meeting with him," Clara said, "paying him, perhaps, to keep silent about it." "I have tried," the Dowager admitted, shame flickering across her face for the first time since Clara had known her. "I did not want Julian to learn how deeply his brother had fallen into debt in those final months, nor how deeply my own silence protected that secret. I thought I could manage Silas quietly, the way I have managed every uncomfortable truth in this family for 30 years. I did not understand, until very recently, how far his ambitions had grown beyond that original debt. He no longer wants money, Clara. He wants the title itself, or failing that, the satisfaction of destroying whatever Julian has built in its place. Your marriage has simply become the easiest target within his reach." Clara absorbed this in silence, the picture growing darker with every new piece. "Why did you never tell Julian?" she asked finally. "Because grief makes cowards of even the proudest among us," the Dowager said quietly. "And I have been a coward regarding Edmund for 5 long years. I did not wish to add one more failure to the ledger of things I could not protect him from, even after his death." I see now that my silence has only made the danger worse, not better. And I am sorry for it. More sorry than I know how to say to a woman I have treated unkindly since the day she arrived in this house." It was not the apology Clara had expected, and she found, to her own surprise, that she believed it. "We will need to tell Julian everything," she said gently. "All of it. If we mean to stop Silas before he does more damage, secrets will only give him more places to hide." The dowager nodded slowly, something like relief passing across her tired face, as though a weight held too long had finally been set down. "Yes," she said. "I believe you are right. I only hope it is not already too late to matter." That evening, the three of them sat together in the study, the fire burning low as the dowager repeated, haltingly and with more honesty than Clara had ever heard from her, everything she had confessed that afternoon. Julian listened without interrupting, his hands clasped tightly before him, his face pale in the firelight as the truth of his brother's final months settled over him like a weight he had not known he was still carrying. "I wish he had come to me," he said quietly, once his mother had finished. "I would have found the money. I would have found some way to help him, if only he had trusted me enough to ask." "He did not want your help," the dowager said gently, a kindness in her voice Clara had not heard directed at her son before. "He wanted your respect, and he feared that admitting the debt would cost him both. That was my failing as much as his, perhaps more. I taught this family, for 30 years, that weakness was something to be hidden rather than shared. I see now what that lesson has cost us." Julian reached for Clara's hand without seeming to think about it, an instinct rather than a decision, and she laced her fingers through his, grateful for the small, steady anchor of his touch amid the unraveling grief around them. "We cannot undo what happened to Edmund," he said finally, "but we can stop Silas from using his memory to destroy what remains of this family. That much, at least, is within our power." The dowager rose from her chair, steadier now than she had been in weeks, and for the first time since Clara's arrival, something like warmth passed between the two women, unspoken but understood. "Then let us stop him together," she said, "all three of us. I have hidden from this fight long enough." Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling faintly against the old windows of Ravenscar Hall, and Clara felt, despite the danger still gathering somewhere beyond those walls, a strange and steady calm settle over her, the quiet certainty that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The solicitor's report arrived 3 days later, and its contents turned Clara's blood cold. Silas Cromwell had not simply questioned family debts through gossip and letters. He had petitioned the courts, quietly and through intermediaries, to challenge the legal validity of Clara's marriage settlement, claiming that her father's outstanding debts at the time of the wedding rendered the entire arrangement fraudulent, an attempt to shield the Whitmore family from creditors under the protection of a ducal title. If the challenge succeeded, the marriage itself could be annulled, and Clara's family would lose whatever protection Julian's fortune had provided them. "He does not care whether the challenge succeeds," Julian said grimly, reading the report a second time by lamplight. "He cares only that it will drag our family through months of public scrutiny, humiliation enough to satisfy whatever grievance he has carried since Edmund's death. Even if we win, Clara, the damage to your family's name, and to mine, may already be done by the time it is settled." Clara sat very still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Then we must ensure he never brings the challenge to court at all," she said. Julian looked up at her, something sharp and searching in his gaze. "What are you suggesting?" "I do not yet know," Clara admitted. "But I do know that a man like Silas Cromwell does not act from strength. He acts from resentment, from years of watching a title and a fortune pass him by. Men like that can be reasoned with, sometimes, if you understand precisely what it is they believe they are owed." The following afternoon, without informing Julian of her full intentions, Clara requested a private audience with Silas Cromwell himself, using Beatrice as an intermediary to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, a quiet tea room favored by families with more discretion than fortune. Julian objected fiercely when he learned of it, but Clara held firm, insisting that she alone understood what needed to be said, and that Julian's presence would only harden a man already primed for confrontation. Before she left for the meeting, Clara stopped in the nursery wing that had once belonged to Julian and Edmund as boys, now quiet and unused, and found Beatrice waiting there as arranged, twisting her gloves nervously between her hands. "Are you certain of this?" Beatrice asked. "Silas is not a man who responds well to being cornered. I have seen him turn generosity into fresh grievance before now." "I am not cornering him," Clara said, though her own pulse beat quickly beneath her composed exterior. "I am offering him the one thing he has never truly been given by this family, an honest reckoning instead of silence." Whether he accepts it is his choice to make. But I would rather try and fail than let this marriage be destroyed by a debt none of us were ever brave enough to discuss plainly. Beatrice studied her for a long moment, something like respect settling into her expression. I misjudged you when we first met, she admitted. I thought Julian had married a woman seeking only security, someone who would fold at the first sign of real difficulty. I see now I was mistaken. Clara offered a small, tired smile. I very nearly did fold, she admitted, more than once since the night I arrived at Ravenscar Hall, but I have found, since then, that I would rather fight for this family than retreat from it, whatever the danger. They left the nursery together, and Beatrice's carriage carried Clara toward the quiet tea room where Silas Cromwell waited, the city passing in a blur outside the window as Clara rehearsed, silently, every word she intended to say. Silas Cromwell proved to be smaller than Clara had expected, wiry and sharp-featured, with restless eyes that assessed her the moment she entered the room, weighing her worth the way a merchant weighs goods before a sale. Your Grace, he said, rising with exaggerated courtesy. I confess I did not expect you to come alone. I did not come to fight you, Clara said, seating herself across from him without waiting for an invitation. I came to understand you. Lady Fenwick tells me Edmund Ashford owed you a debt before he died. I would like to know the truth of it, from you directly, rather than through half-heard fragments and family silence. Something flickered in Silas's expression, surprise perhaps, or wariness at being addressed so plainly. He did owe me, he said finally. A considerable sum, borrowed against promises he never lived to keep. I extended that loan out of what I believed, at the time, was family loyalty. Foolish as that sounds now. When he died, the debt died with any hope of repayment, and his family never so much as acknowledged what he owed me, let alone offered restitution. I watched Julian inherit everything, the title, the fortune, the respect of every drawing room in London, while I was left holding worthless paper and an insult no one would even discuss aloud. You could have brought the debt to Julian directly, Clara said. Asked for what you were owed plainly, rather than waging this quiet war against his marriage, and be dismissed as a grasping opportunist trying to profit from a dead man's grief, Silas said bitterly. I know precisely how that conversation would have gone, Your Grace. I have watched this family close ranks against outsiders my entire life. I decided, some time ago, that if they would not give me what I was owed honestly, I would find another way to make them understand what it costs to be dismissed so easily. Clara studied him carefully, searching past the bitterness for the wound beneath it, and found, to her own surprise, something she recognized. It was not so different from her own fear in those early days at Ravenscar Hall, the sense of being an outsider in a house that measured worth by blood and title rather than character. You are not wrong to feel wronged, she said slowly. A debt is a debt, and Edmund should have found some way to settle it before his death, or his family should have honored it after. But destroying my marriage will not repay what you are owed, Mr. Cromwell. It will only add another grievance to a family already burdened with more grief than it knows how to carry, and it will not put a single shilling back into your pocket. Let me propose something else instead. Silas leaned forward slightly, curiosity overtaking suspicion. I am listening, he said. Julian will honor the debt his brother left unpaid, Clara said, though she had not yet secured Julian's agreement to any such thing, trusting instead in her understanding of the man she had married. In full, with interest for the years it has gone unsettled. In exchange, you will withdraw your challenge to my marriage, publicly and without condition, and you will never again use Edmund's memory as a weapon against this family. That is not charity, Mr. Cromwell. It is simply what was owed to you from the beginning, offered honestly instead of extracted through threats. Silas was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she could not entirely read. Why would you offer me this? He asked finally. You have no reason to defend a debt that has nothing to do with you. Because I understand what it is to be underestimated, Clara said simply. And because my husband has already lost one person he loved to circumstances he could not control. I do not intend to let his brother's memory be twisted into a weapon that costs him anything more. That evening, when Clara told Julian what she had done, she braced herself for anger, for the accusation that she had overstepped, negotiated matters that were not hers to negotiate. Instead, he was quiet for a long time, studying her with an expression that held something far softer than anger. You went to him alone, he said finally, without telling me your full plan. Do you understand how dangerous that was? I understand, she said. But I also understood that you could not offer him what he truly wanted, not without years of resentment clouding the conversation before it even began. He did not need a duke standing over him, defending a debt out of obligation. He needed someone willing to see him plainly, without the weight of the title between them. Julian crossed the room and pulled her gently into his arms, and Clara felt the tension that had gathered in her shoulders over the past days finally begin to ease. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she had not heard from him before. "I do not know how I managed before you arrived in this house, turning every careful wall I built into something worth tearing down." "I did not intend to tear anything down," she said softly, though her heart raced at the tenderness in his voice. "I only meant to save my family, and to survive whatever this marriage turned out to be." Around them, the household had grown quiet for the night, the fire burning low, and for a brief moment, the danger gathering beyond these walls seemed to recede entirely, leaving only the two of them, and the fragile, unfamiliar warmth growing steadily between them despite everything working to destroy it. "And now?" he asked, pulling back just enough to search her face. "What do you believe it has turned out to be?" Clara considered the question carefully, thinking of the cold declaration she had made on their wedding night, the promise to keep this marriage nothing more than a contract, and how thoroughly that promise had unraveled in the weeks since. "Something I did not expect," she admitted. "Something I am no longer certain I could give up, even if the danger passed tomorrow and I was offered my freedom instead." Julian's hand rose to cup her face, the same gentle gesture from the library weeks before, and this time, when he leaned down, neither of them hesitated. The kiss was soft at first, careful, as though either of them might still pull away, and then it deepened into something neither could pretend was born only of duty or gratitude. When they finally parted, Julian rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I told you that first night that I would call you nothing but my wife," he murmured. "I did not know then how true I meant those words to become." Clara closed her eyes, letting herself, for the first time since the wedding, simply believe him. But even as warmth spread through her chest, a small, cold thread of worry remained, coiled somewhere beneath the tenderness of the moment. Silas Cromwell had agreed to consider her offer, but he had not yet accepted it, and until he did, the danger circling their marriage had not fully passed. That worry proved well-founded sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, a note arrived at Ravenscar Hall, unsigned, delivered by a messenger no one in the household recognized. Clara opened it with trembling hands, and the words within stole the breath from her lungs entirely. "Your offer comes too late," it read. "I have already found a faster way to collect what I am owed. Watch your family closely, Your Grace. Not everyone in it can be trusted." Julian read the note over her shoulder, his jaw tightening as he reached the final line. "He is trying to frighten you," he said, though the tension in his voice suggested he was not entirely convinced of his own words. "It is what men like Silas do when their first plan fails. They reach for whatever weapon frightens the most, even if it is only a hollow threat meant to unsettle rather than harm." "And if it is not hollow?" Clara asked quietly. "If someone in this house truly has been working against us all along?" Julian did not answer immediately, and in his silence Clara saw the same fear she carried herself, the memory of the missing papers taken from his study, the unexplained access to private settlement documents that only a handful of people in this household could have provided. Someone close to them had already betrayed their trust once. There was no guarantee it would not happen again. "We will find out who," Julian said finally, his voice hardening with resolve. "Whatever Silas intends next, I will not let it reach you unprepared this time. I have been too careful, too quiet, hoping this danger would resolve itself through patience and reason alone. That ends tonight." He called for the household steward within the hour, ordering a quiet and thorough review of every servant with access to his private study, while Clara sat by the fire turning the unsigned note over and over in her hands, searching the careful, deliberate handwriting for any clue as to who beyond Silas himself might have helped deliver it. The threat had been vague by design, she realized, cruel in its very lack of specificity. Watch your family closely. It could mean anyone. It could mean everyone. And until they learned the truth, it would mean that neither of them could fully trust the walls that had only recently begun to feel like home. The steward's investigation uncovered nothing for 3 long days, and Clara had nearly convinced herself that the note had been an empty threat after all, when Nora came to find her in the garden, her face pale and her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "Your Grace," she said, "there is something I should have told you weeks ago. I was afraid to speak of it, but after the note, I cannot stay silent any longer." Clara set down the basket of cut flowers she had been carrying, giving the young maid her full attention. "Tell me," she said gently. "It is Mrs. Prentice, the housekeeper," Nora said, glancing nervously toward the house as though the woman might appear at any moment. "She has been meeting someone outside the estate grounds, late at night, twice now that I have seen with my own eyes. I followed her the second time, out of worry more than anything, and I saw her speaking with a man near the eastern gate. I could not hear what was said, but I recognized him. He was at the dinner party, weeks ago, standing near Lady Fenwick before she arrived. I believe it was Mr. Cromwell himself. Clara's blood ran cold. Mrs. Prentice had served this household for over a decade, trusted enough to hold keys to every room, including Julian's study. If she had been the one supplying Silas with the settlement papers, the betrayal ran deeper and closer than either Clara or Julian had feared. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" Clara asked, though gently, understanding the fear that must have kept the young maid silent. "I did not want to accuse someone so far above me without proof," Nora admitted. "Mrs. Prentice could have me dismissed with a single word, and I have a mother in the village who depends on my wages. But I could not stay quiet any longer, not after that note arrived. Whatever happens to me, I would rather you know the truth than let danger reach you because I was too afraid to speak." Clara took the young woman's hands in her own, moved by the courage it must have taken to come forward despite the risk. "You will not lose your position," she said firmly. "I promise you that, whatever else happens. Thank you for trusting me with this." She found Julian in his study within the hour, and together they devised a plan to confirm Nora's account without alerting Mrs. Prentice to their suspicion. Watching the housekeeper carefully over the following days, noting the small discrepancies they had somehow overlooked before, keys that did not hang in their usual place for an hour or more, ledgers left slightly disturbed, a woman who flinched, almost imperceptibly, whenever Silas Cromwell's name was mentioned in her presence. The confirmation came on a stormy evening, when Julian, acting on a hunch, followed Mrs. Prentice himself to the eastern gate and witnessed, from the shadow of the old stone wall, the housekeeper handing a folded paper to a man Clara recognized instantly from Nora's description the moment Julian returned, soaked through and grim-faced, to describe what he had seen. "She has been giving him copies of estate correspondence for months," Julian said, pacing the length of his study with barely contained anger. "Not only the settlement papers, letters, private accounts, anything that might help him build his case against us in the courts, or simply anything that might give him leverage should the legal challenge fail. I confronted her the moment I returned. She confessed everything within minutes, weeping the entire time." "Why would she betray this family after so many years of service?" Clara asked. "Money," Julian said bitterly. "Her brother owes debts of his own, apparently. Debts Silas offered to settle in exchange for her cooperation. She swears she never intended real harm to come to either of us, only believed she was providing information that would end our marriage quietly, sparing everyone a public scandal. I do not know whether to believe her." Clara considered this carefully. "Whether we believe her or not," she said finally, "the danger has not passed. If Silas has had access to our private correspondence for months, he may know far more about our plans, our vulnerabilities, than we have accounted for. We need to assume he knows everything Mrs. Prentice could tell him, and plan accordingly." Before Mrs. Prentice left the house for the final time, Clara asked to speak with her privately, curious despite everything to understand the woman's reasoning. The former housekeeper sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, refusing to meet Clara's eyes. "I never wished harm on you, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Mr. Cromwell made it sound so small at first, only a copied letter here and there, nothing that could truly hurt anyone. By the time I understood how far it had gone, I did not know how to stop without confessing everything and losing my position entirely. I am ashamed of what I have done. My brother's debts do not excuse it, though they are the only reason I can offer." Clara studied her for a long moment, anger warring with an unexpected flicker of sympathy. "Debt makes desperate people of us all," she said finally. "My own father proved that well enough. I do not excuse what you have done, Mrs. Prentice, but I understand, perhaps better than you realize, how easily a person can be led astray by circumstances beyond their control." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for that mercy, Your Grace, whatever else you decide." Julian dismissed the housekeeper that same night, though he stopped short of pursuing legal consequences against her, moved by some remaining thread of the loyalty she had betrayed. But the damage, they soon discovered, had already been done. 2 days later, Silas Cromwell's legal challenge to the marriage was formally filed with the courts, accompanied by a public announcement in the London papers that could not be quietly withdrawn or ignored. The household fell into a tense, watchful silence as the scandal spread through society with predictable speed. Invitations that had once arrived regularly for the new Duke and Duchess of Ravenscar slowed to a trickle. Whispers followed Clara wherever she went, curious eyes assessing her at every gathering she still dared to attend, weighing whether she was a fortune hunter finally exposed, or simply an unfortunate woman caught between a grieving family and a vengeful cousin. Her mother wrote from Surrey, frightened and apologetic, offering to withdraw entirely from society if it would spare Clara further embarrassment. And Clara spent an entire evening composing a careful reply, assuring her mother that none of this was her doing, that the fault lay entirely with a bitter man determined to punish a family for a debt that was never truly Clara's to answer for. Her younger sisters, still too young to fully understand the scandal unfolding around them, wrote simpler letters full of questions about the grand house Clara now called home, and reading their innocent curiosity brought her a small, aching comfort amid the tension pressing in from every side. Clara found herself leaning increasingly on Beatrice during those difficult weeks, an unlikely friendship blooming from what had once seemed destined to remain rivalry. Beatrice visited often, bringing news gathered from her own wide circle of acquaintance, warning them of shifting opinion among the families whose support they would need if the hearing turned against them. It was Beatrice, in fact, who first suggested that Silas Cromwell's own creditors might be persuaded to testify regarding his character, evidence that could prove far more damaging to his case than anything Clara or Julian could offer in their own defense. "He has debts of his own scattered across half of London," Beatrice told them one evening, settling into a chair in the study with the easy familiarity of a woman who had stopped considering herself an outsider to their troubles. "Men who lend to him grow tired of waiting for repayment, much as he grew tired of waiting for Edmund's. If the court hears testimony that Mr. Cromwell has pursued this challenge not from any genuine grievance but from simple desperation for funds he cannot otherwise obtain, his credibility may crumble before he ever reaches the heart of his argument against you." Julian's solicitor pursued the lead immediately, and within days, 2 of Silas's own creditors had agreed, reluctantly and only after considerable persuasion, to testify regarding the true state of his finances should the hearing require it. It was not a certainty of victory, but it was, for the first time in weeks, a genuine thread of hope, and Clara clung to it through the sleepless nights that followed, counting down the days until the hearing that would decide the fate of everything she had come to love. Clara bore it as best she could, though the strain showed in the shadows beneath her eyes, the careful, guarded way she now moved through rooms that had once felt, however briefly, like home. Julian's own composure frayed as the weeks wore on, his patience thinning as the legal proceedings dragged toward a hearing that would determine, in a matter of hours before an unforgiving court, whether their marriage would stand or be dissolved entirely. The night before the hearing, Clara found she could not sleep, and she rose from her bed to walk the darkened corridors of Ravenscar Hall, drawn eventually to the gallery where she had first learned of Edmund's existence months before. She stood before his portrait for a long while, studying the resemblance to Julian in the careful brushwork, wondering what kind of man he had truly been, beyond the grief and secrecy that had shrouded his memory for so long. "You are awake too," a voice said softly behind her, and she turned to find Julian standing in the doorway, equally sleepless, his dark hair disheveled and his eyes shadowed with worry. "I could not stop thinking," she admitted, "about tomorrow, and what happens if the court rules against us." Julian crossed the gallery to stand beside her, looking up at his brother's portrait alongside her. "Whatever the court decides," he said quietly, "I do not intend to let it separate us. If they rule the settlement invalid, I will marry you again, properly, without any contract or convenience attached to it. I will marry you 100 times over if it comes to that, Clara. This is no longer about debts or family obligations. It has not been for a long while now." Clara turned to look at him, her heart aching with the weight of everything they had endured together in these past months. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked softly. "That first night, you said you would call me nothing but your wife, and I thought it was only stubbornness, or duty, but it was never only that, was it?" Julian's expression softened, unguarded in a way she had rarely seen from him. "I did not fully understand it myself that first night," he admitted. "I only knew that something in me refused to accept the distance you were determined to keep. I told myself it was pride, or the natural resistance of a man unaccustomed to being refused. It took me weeks to admit it was something far simpler than that. I had already begun to fall in love with you, Clara, before I even knew your favorite color, or the sound of your laughter, or the particular way you defend everyone you care about, even a housekeeper who betrayed us, even a cousin who has done nothing but bring us harm." Clara's breath caught, tears rising unexpectedly in her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and entirely natural as she spoke them aloud for the first time. "I have loved you for weeks, and I was too afraid of the danger surrounding us to say it plainly, as though naming it might make it easier for someone to take away." Julian gathered her into his arms, and they stood together beneath his brother's portrait for a long while, the storm outside finally beginning to quiet, both of them drawing what strength they could from each other ahead of the reckoning that awaited them in the morning. The courtroom the following day was crowded beyond anything Clara had anticipated. Curious spectators packed into every available seat, eager to witness the public unraveling of a scandal that had dominated London gossip for weeks. Silas Cromwell sat across the chamber, composed and confident, flanked by solicitors who had clearly been well paid for the occasion. Clara felt Julian's hand tighten around hers as the proceedings began, and she drew strength from the steady warmth of his presence beside her. The case against them, presented with cold precision, painted Clara's father as a man so thoroughly consumed by debt that the marriage settlement itself had been constructed to defraud creditors, rendering the entire union legally void from its inception. Clara listened to her father's failures laid bare before a room full of strangers, feeling each word land like a physical blow, and she understood, watching Silas's confident expression across the chamber, exactly how close they stood to losing everything they had built together. In the days before the hearing, Julian had spared no effort preparing their defense, meeting late into the night with his solicitor, gathering testimony from Beatrice regarding Silas's own admissions about the debt Edmund had left behind, and pressing the dowager to finally speak the truth publicly, however painful it might prove for the family's pride. She had agreed without hesitation, a resolve in her that Clara had not seen before, the quiet courage of a woman finally choosing honesty over the silence she had guarded for 5 long years. "We will not win by hiding from what happened to Edmund," the dowager had told them, the night before the hearing, her voice steady despite the difficulty of the words. "We will win by telling the truth plainly, all of it, and trusting that a fair court will see Silas Cromwell for exactly what he is, a man consumed by grievance, twisting a private family sorrow into a weapon for his own gain. I have hidden from that truth long enough. It is past time I stopped." Clara had been moved nearly to tears by the offer, understanding what it cost a woman so long devoted to appearances to stand before a courtroom of strangers and admit her family's private grief in full public view. She had reached for the dowager's hand that night, and for the first time since her arrival at Ravenscar Hall, the older woman had not pulled away. Now, seated in the crowded courtroom with Julian's hand steady around her own, Clara watched the dowager rise from her seat as their solicitor called her forward, her spine straight despite the whispers rippling through the gathered spectators. And Clara understood that whatever the court decided in the hours ahead, this family had already won something far more lasting than any legal victory, a reckoning with grief and silence that had waited 5 long years to finally be spoken aloud. Then it was their turn to answer. Julian rose first, standing before the court with the calm, measured authority Clara had come to associate with him in his finest moments, and he told the truth plainly, exactly as his mother had counseled the night before. He spoke of Edmund, of the debt his brother had carried in silence rather than risk disappointing a family too proud to acknowledge his struggles, of the years of grief that had followed, and of Silas Cromwell's slow transformation from a grieving relative into a man consumed by resentment, determined to extract from Julian's marriage what he had never been brave enough to ask for honestly. "I do not deny that my brother owed Mr. Cromwell a debt," Julian told the court, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded chamber. "I have already offered to settle that debt in full, with interest for the years it has gone unpaid. Mr. Cromwell rejected that offer. He does not want repayment. He wants my marriage destroyed, my wife humiliated before this court, and my family's grief paraded publicly for his own satisfaction. I ask this court to consider what manner of grievance requires such cruelty to satisfy it." The dowager spoke next, her voice steady despite the visible effort it cost her, describing Edmund's final months with a rawness that silenced even the most restless spectators in the gallery. She spoke of her own silence in the years since, the shame that had kept her from acknowledging her son's debt publicly, and the slow realization, only recently arrived at, that her silence had done far more harm than the honest truth ever could have. "I have spent 5 years protecting my son's memory from scrutiny," she told the court, her composure cracking just slightly as she spoke. "I see now that in protecting his memory, I nearly allowed a bitter man to destroy his brother's marriage instead. I will not make that mistake twice. Edmund would not have wanted his memory used as a weapon against the family he loved, however imperfectly that family understood him while he lived." Then came the testimony Beatrice had helped secure, 2 men who had lent Silas Cromwell considerable sums over the past several years, both now testifying with visible discomfort about mounting debts he had shown no genuine intention of repaying. Debts that painted a portrait of a man motivated far more by desperation than by any principled grievance regarding his cousin's memory. The courtroom's mood shifted perceptibly as the testimony continued, sympathy that had briefly favored Silas curdling slowly into suspicion. Silas Cromwell's composure, so carefully maintained throughout the proceedings, finally began to crack as his own solicitor struggled to counter the mounting evidence against his character. When the judge called him forward to answer the accusations directly, his voice, once so confident, wavered noticeably. "I only wanted what was owed to me," he said, and for the first time since Clara had met him, something raw and unguarded broke through his careful bitterness. "Edmund promised me repayment before he died. He promised, and then he simply was not there anymore to keep that promise, and everyone around him acted as though the debt had died along with him, as though my loss meant nothing simply because I was not born to the right name." The chamber fell silent at the honesty of it, and Clara felt, despite everything Silas had put them through, an unexpected flicker of sympathy for the grief buried beneath his resentment. She rose from her seat before she had fully decided to, drawing surprised glances from the gathered spectators as she asked the judge's permission to speak. "Mr. Cromwell is right about one thing," she said, once permission had been granted, her voice carrying clearly despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "His grief was never adequately acknowledged by this family, and that failure created the resentment that brought us all to this courtroom today. But destroying a marriage will not resolve that grief, nor will it repay a debt that has nothing to do with me, or with the settlement that brought me into this family. My husband has already offered full repayment, with genuine acknowledgement of the wrong done to him. I ask this court not simply to dismiss Mr. Cromwell's challenge, but to recognize that beneath his cruelty lies a genuine and long-ignored grievance, one that repayment, not humiliation, is the proper remedy for. It was, Clara would reflect later, the strangest kind of victory, one that asked for mercy even toward the man who had tried to destroy her happiness. But she had learned, over these difficult months at Ravenscar Hall, that grief left unaddressed only curdled into something more dangerous over time, and she had no wish to see that pattern repeat itself, in this family or in Silas Cromwell's embittered heart. The judge deliberated only briefly before returning his ruling. The marriage settlement, he declared, had been constructed entirely within the bounds of the law, with full and honest disclosure of the Whitmore family's financial circumstances, and no fraud could be reasonably established against either party. Silas Cromwell's challenge was dismissed in full, and the judge, in a final rebuke that drew murmurs of approval from the gallery, cautioned him plainly against pursuing further legal harassment of the Ashford family, suggesting that a private settlement of his legitimate grievance, as the Duchess herself had proposed, would serve him far better than any further public spectacle. Outside the courthouse, as the crowd dispersed into the gray afternoon light, Silas approached them hesitantly, his earlier bitterness replaced by something closer to exhaustion. "I did not expect you to defend me in there," he said to Clara, his voice quiet enough that only she and Julian could hear it. "After everything I have done to your family, I did not defend what you did," Clara said honestly, "only what caused it. There is a difference, Mr. Cromwell, though I understand if you are too tired today to see it clearly." Julian stepped forward then, extending his hand toward the man who had spent months trying to destroy everything he loved. "The offer still stands," he said, "full repayment of Edmund's debt, with interest, and my genuine apology that it took a courtroom and a public scandal to finally acknowledge what was owed to you honestly. I would rather end this as something other than enemies, if you are willing." Silas studied the offered hand for a long moment before finally accepting it, something in his shoulders loosening, as though a weight carried far too long had finally, imperfectly, begun to lift. "Perhaps I was wrong," he said quietly, "about what I truly wanted from this. I believe I wanted someone, anyone, in this family, to simply acknowledge that my grief was real. You have done that today, more plainly than I expected. I find I do not know quite what to do with the anger now that it has nowhere left to go." "Grief takes time to settle into something gentler," the Dowager said, stepping forward to join them, her voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of 5 long years. "I would know, but it can be done, Silas. I hope, in time, you will find your way to it, as I am only now beginning to find mine." They parted ways outside the courthouse, not as friends exactly, but no longer as enemies either, and Clara felt, walking back toward the carriage with Julian's hand warm around hers, a lightness she had not experienced since the morning of her wedding, the sense of a weight finally, truly lifted. 2 days later, Clara's mother arrived at Ravenscar Hall with her younger sisters in tow, having read of the court's ruling in the London papers and unable to wait any longer to see for herself that her eldest daughter was truly safe. Clara met them in the entrance hall, and the sight of her mother's anxious face, so quickly softening into relief, brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I was so afraid for you," her mother admitted, embracing her tightly. "Reading of that dreadful man's accusations in the papers, I feared we had traded one disaster for another when you married. I am so relieved to see you standing here, whole and unharmed." "I am more than unharmed, Mother," Clara said, glancing back to where Julian stood waiting, patient and warm, near the drawing room door. "I am happier than I ever believed possible, when this all began." Her younger sisters, Margaret and Louisa, immediately abandoned their careful manners at the sight of the grand entrance hall, exclaiming over the height of the ceilings and the elegance of the staircase. With the unfiltered delight of girls who had never seen anything so fine, Julian greeted them warmly, and Clara watched with quiet joy as he knelt slightly to speak with Louisa, the youngest, who could not have been more than 10 years old, answering her breathless questions about the house with a patience that revealed, more clearly than any grand declaration could have, exactly the kind of husband and father he intended to be. "He is very kind, is he not?" her mother murmured, watching the same scene beside Clara. "I confess I had my doubts when the arrangement was first proposed. A duke, marrying so quickly and for such practical reasons. I feared you would find only coldness in this house." "I feared the same," Clara admitted. "But I found something far warmer than I ever expected, buried beneath all that careful composure. I am grateful every day that I did not give up searching for it." That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner in the same small family dining room where Julian and Clara had shared their first true conversation months before, and the table rang with laughter for the first time since Clara's arrival at Ravenscar Hall. Her sisters peppering Julian with questions about the estate, the dowager smiling more freely than Clara had ever seen from her, even Beatrice, invited for the occasion, trading gentle jokes with the dowager about the disastrous dinner party where this entire drama had first begun in earnest. Watching the warmth spreading around the table, Clara felt something settle deeply into place within her, the sense of two families, once strangers bound only by a cold contract, slowly becoming something far more precious, a single family bound now by choice and genuine affection, rather than obligation alone. After the meal, while the younger girls explored the gardens under Nora's watchful supervision and the dowager retired early, tired but contented, Julian drew Clara aside onto the terrace, where the last light of evening painted the sky in soft shades of gold and rose. "Your sisters are wonderful," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist as they looked out over the darkening grounds. "Louisa asked me no fewer than 6 times whether she might visit again soon. I told her she may visit as often as she likes. This is her family now too, as much as it is yours." "Thank you," Clara said softly, leaning into him, "for all of it, for the debt you settled, for the kindness you have shown my family, for choosing to fight for this marriage instead of simply enduring it, the way I once feared you might." "I could never have simply endured you," Julian said, turning her gently to face him, his eyes warm in the fading light. "Not from that very first night, when you stood at that window and told me not to call you my wife. I think some part of me knew, even then, that I would spend the rest of my life proving you wrong about that." Clara laughed softly, the sound light and unguarded in a way it had not been in months. "You very nearly succeeded in proving me right instead," she teased. "It took a scheming cousin, a betrayed housekeeper, and an entire courtroom of strangers before either of us admitted the truth plainly. Then we shall have to make up for lost time," Julian murmured, drawing her closer as the first stars appeared above the darkening gardens of Ravenscar Hall. That evening, Ravenscar Hall glowed with candlelight for the first time in weeks, the household staff moving through the halls with a lightness that matched Clara's own relief. Nora found her in the corridor outside her chambers, beaming with a joy she made no effort to hide. "I heard everything, Your Grace," she said. "The whole staff has heard by now. I am so glad it is over, and so proud of how you handled it." Clara embraced the young maid warmly, grateful beyond words for the courage that had first brought Mrs. Prentice's betrayal to light. "None of this would have ended well without your honesty, Nora," she said. "I will not forget it." Later, when the house had finally quieted for the night, Clara found Julian waiting for her in the same bedchamber where this entire journey had begun months before, standing at the same window where she had once delivered her cold declaration on their wedding night. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression, open and unguarded in a way she had rarely seen, made her breath catch. "Do you remember what you told me, that first night?" he asked softly, as she crossed the room to stand beside him. "I remember every word," she said. "I told you not to call me your wife, and I told you I would call you nothing else," he said, reaching for her hands and drawing her closer. I meant it then as a kind of stubbornness, perhaps, a refusal to be dismissed so easily by a woman I barely knew. But I do not mean it that way any longer. Clara looked up at him, her heart full to bursting with everything they had survived together. What do you mean it as now? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. I mean it as the truest thing I have ever said, Julian murmured, his voice rough with emotion. You are my wife, Clara, not because a contract demanded it, not because your family needed saving or mine needed an heir, but because I love you more completely than I ever believed myself capable of loving anyone. I do not simply call you my wife, I choose you as my wife, every single day, and I intend to keep choosing you for the rest of my life, if you will let me. Tears rose in Clara's eyes, and this time she made no effort to hide them. Don't call me your wife, she whispered, echoing her own words from months before, and Julian's expression flickered with confusion for the briefest moment before she continued, a smile breaking through her tears. Call me the woman you love. That is what I truly wish to be called now, more than any title this family could ever offer me. Julian's answering smile was the warmest she had ever seen from him, all the careful composure and guarded grief finally giving way to something unreserved and entirely joyful. Then that is exactly what I shall call you, he said softly, drawing her into his arms, for as long as we both shall live. Outside the window, the gardens of Ravenscar Hall lay quiet beneath a clear night sky. The storms of the past months finally passed, and Clara, standing in the circle of her husband's arms in the very room where their story had begun with such cold uncertainty, understood at last that every difficult step of this journey, every fear and danger and unexpected tenderness, had led her exactly where she was always meant to be. Spring arrived early at Ravenscar Hall the following year, and with it came a letter that made Clara's hands tremble as she read it in the morning light of the breakfast room. Julian, she called, and something in her voice brought him quickly from across the room, concern written plainly on his face until he saw the smile she could no longer contain. What is it? He asked, crossing to her side. Silas Cromwell has written, she said, still scarcely believing the contents herself. He says the repayment has allowed him to settle his own debts entirely, and that he has taken a position managing a small estate in the north, honest work, he calls it, the first he has felt proud of in years. He thanks us both, Julian. He says he understands now what Edmund's friendship truly meant to him, and that he no longer wishes to define himself by grievance. Julian read the letter over her shoulder, and something in his expression eased, an old tension finally releasing after more than a year of careful vigilance. I am glad, he said quietly, truly glad. Edmund would have wanted this, I think, some good finally coming from a debt that caused so much pain for so long. Nora had risen, by then, to the position of housekeeper herself, a promotion Julian had insisted upon the moment the household required a new one, trusting her judgment and loyalty above candidates with far longer records of service. She ran the household with a warmth Mrs. Prentice had never quite possessed, and Clara often found her laughing with the younger maids in the corridors, a lightness that had settled over the entire house since the danger of that first difficult year had finally passed. Their lives, in the months since the courtroom victory, had settled into a rhythm neither of them had dared hope for during those anxious early weeks of their marriage. The dowager, freed at last from the weight of 5 years of silence, had grown warmer with each passing month, spending long afternoons with Clara's younger sisters whenever they visited, teaching them embroidery with a patience Clara suspected she had never shown her own sons at that age, too burdened then by grief and propriety to simply enjoy the company of children. Beatrice visited often too, no longer a source of jealousy but a genuine friend, and it was Beatrice who arrived one afternoon in early summer, with news of her own, a quiet engagement to a widowed baron from Kent, a gentleman, she said, who understood grief without needing it explained to him, having buried a wife of his own some years before. I did not think I would find this again, Beatrice confided to Clara one evening, the two of them walking together through the gardens while their husbands discussed estate matters inside. I had resigned myself, after Julian, to a quiet life of visiting other people's happiness rather than building my own. I am grateful, more than I can say, that both of you proved me wrong. Clara squeezed her friend's hand warmly. I am glad it found you when you least expected it, she said. That seems to be the way of these things. Even the dowager, once so guarded and difficult to read, had grown fond enough of Beatrice's news to insist on hosting the wedding breakfast herself, an offer that left Beatrice speechless with gratitude. Clara watched the two women plan the small celebration together over the following weeks, marveling at how thoroughly grief had loosened its grip on this family, since the truth had finally been spoken aloud in that crowded courtroom. The dowager, who had once seemed incapable of warmth, now hummed softly to herself while arranging flowers for the occasion, a habit Clara suspected she had abandoned decades ago and was only now, slowly, rediscovering. It was on a warm evening in early autumn, nearly 18 months after that first cold declaration in the ducal bedchamber, that Clara found Julian in the small cottage at the edge of the western woods, the one that had belonged to Edmund, its shutters finally thrown open to the light after 5 years of careful preservation. Julian had asked her, weeks before, whether she thought it wrong to finally use the space for something new, and Clara had encouraged him gently, certain that Edmund would have wanted his brother to reclaim joy from a place that had once brought them both such peace. The unfinished paintings still lined the walls, carefully preserved, but new canvases had joined them now. Julian's own tentative attempts at the craft his brother had loved so dearly, clumsy still but earnest, a way of finally grieving Edmund not through silence but through the very thing that had made him happiest in life. "You have been out here for hours," Clara said, finding him bent over a half-finished landscape, paint smudged across his knuckles. "I lost track of time," he admitted, setting down his brush as she approached. "I keep thinking I understand now, just a little, why he loved this so much. There is a peace in it I did not expect to find." Clara studied the painting, an attempt at the very gardens visible through the cottage window, imperfect in its proportions but full of a tenderness that could not be mistaken. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "He would be proud of you, I think, for finding your way back here." Julian pulled her close, careful of the paint still drying on his hands, and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. "I have something to ask you," he said, a slight nervousness entering his voice that Clara had not heard from him in a very long time. She pulled back to look at him, curious. "What is it?" "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "of Louisa, and how often she asks to visit, of the way this house has felt fuller with every visit from your family, of the joy my mother has found again in the company of children. I find myself wondering whether you might be ready to consider filling these halls with children of our own. I do not ask lightly, and I do not ask because it is expected of us. I ask because I have watched you with your sisters, and I cannot think of anyone I would rather build a family with." Clara's heart swelled, tears rising unexpectedly to her eyes. "I have been thinking the very same thing," she admitted softly. "I only did not know how to raise it, after everything this past year has already asked of us." Julian's answering smile was brighter than she had ever seen from him, all the careful reserve of that first cold evening entirely gone now, replaced by something open and unguarded and utterly joyful. "Then let us stop merely thinking of it," he said, drawing her into his arms once more, "and start building it instead." They walked back to the main house together as the sun set behind them, painting the gardens in the same warm gold light that had once illuminated Julian's careful, half-finished landscape, and Clara thought, not for the first time, of how far they had traveled from that first frightened declaration on their wedding night. She had told him then not to call her his wife, certain that the word carried only obligation, only the cold weight of a contract neither of them had chosen freely. She understood now, walking hand in hand through the gardens of the home she had come to love so completely, that he had been right from the very beginning. He had called her his wife not out of stubbornness or duty, but because some part of him had recognized, even in that first uncertain meeting, the truth that had taken them both nearly 2 years of grief and danger, and slowly building trust to fully accept. They had never truly been strangers bound by contract at all. They had simply needed time, and courage, and the quiet, steady work of choosing each other, again and again, through every difficulty that tried to pull them apart, to become what they had always been meant to be from the very start. That winter, as the first snow settled softly over the grounds of Ravenscar Hall, Clara stood once more at the window of the ducal bedchamber, watching the gardens turn white and quiet beneath the falling snow, Julian's arms wrapped warmly around her from behind, his chin resting gently against her shoulder. "Do you remember this window?" he murmured against her ear. "I remember everything about that night," she said softly, leaning back into his warmth. "I was so certain then that I knew exactly what this marriage would be." "And what do you know of it now?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked her once before. So long ago it sometimes felt like another lifetime entirely. Clara turned in his arms to face him, her heart full to overflowing with everything they had built together since that first frightened night, and she smiled, certain of her answer in a way she had never been certain of anything before. "I know that it is home," she said simply, "and I would not trade it, or you, for anything in this world." Julian kissed her then, slow and tender and utterly without doubt, and outside the window the snow continued to fall over the quiet gardens of Ravenscar Hall, blanketing the estate in soft white peace, while inside, in the warm glow of candlelight, two people who had once been strangers bound only by necessity, stood wrapped together in a love neither of them had expected to find, and neither of them would ever again let go. Downstairs, the dowager sat by the fire with Clara's mother, who had come to stay through the winter months at Julian's warm insistence, the two women trading stories of their children with the easy comfort of old friends rather than the wary strangers they had once been. In the nursery wing, long closed and silent, fresh linens now waited in readiness, a small act of hope neither Clara nor Julian had spoken of aloud, but which the entire household seemed quietly, joyfully, to understand. And somewhere beyond the estate walls, in a modest house in the North Country, Silas Cromwell sat by his own fire that same snowy evening, a letter half written on the table before him, addressed to the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscar, thanking them once more for a mercy he still did not entirely believe he had deserved, and wishing them, in the plain and honest words of a man finally at peace with his own grief, every happiness the coming year might bring.